Look around the room you are in right now. You have mesh screens on your windows, a solid door tightly sealed against the outside world, maybe a can of bug spray in the cabinet, and a mattress lifted safely off the floor. If a mosquito buzzes near your ear tonight, it is an annoyance. It ruins your mood for 5 minutes until you swat it or turn on the air conditioning. But 30,000 years ago, choosing how to sleep wasn't about comfort. It was a high-stakes psychological war against an invisible enemy. If you couldn't sleep because thousands of blood-sucking insects were draining your body and driving you mad, you became sleep-deprived. And in the Paleolithic world, a split-second delay in your reflexes from exhaustion didn't mean missing a morning meeting. It meant getting torn apart by a cave lion because you didn't hear a twig snap. Biting insects weren't just irritating pests. They were vectors for agonizing diseases, parasites, and a direct ticket to fatal exhaustion. So your ancestors didn't just sit there scratching themselves in the dark. They built things that sound completely genius when you first look at the science. They manipulated chemical compounds, engineered complex air filtration systems, and manufactured insecticidal sleeping mats thousands of years before the first line of written history. Structures and chemical barriers so sophisticated that when modern botanists and archaeologists first found them, they couldn't believe they were built with primitive tools. Here is how they actually won the war for sleep. And I promise you, by the end of this, the simple act of laying your head on a pillow without being eaten alive will feel like an absolute miracle. First, let's kill the most persistent myth about ancient humans and insects. If you watch standard Hollywood movies or read old textbooks, you picture the same thing. Primitive humans, filthy, covered in mud, sleeping on raw dirt inside a dark cave, just toughing it out because they were somehow immune to the pain or just used to it. That image is dead wrong. First of all, nobody just gets used to malaria, yellow fever, or hundreds of bedbugs crawling into their ears. Second, caves were not a refuge from bugs. In fact, deep caves were often hotbeds for bat guano parasites, ticks, and fleas that thrived in the stagnant, damp air. You couldn't just lie down on the ground and hope for the best. The archaeological record proves that human beings have been obsessed with clean, pest-free sleep for as long as we have been human. We have found ancient human skeletons that show clear signs of structural bone infections from insect-borne pathogens, meaning they knew exactly what the stakes were. They had to innovate, or they would literally go insane from the itching and blood loss. They fought back with extreme behavioral psychology and material science. Let me show you the 5 most brilliant defensive methods they actually used to survive the night. Here is the first one, and it involves a level of chemical engineering that completely flips our understanding of the Stone Age. If you are sleeping on the ground, the earth is alive with crawling parasites. Ticks, mites, fleas, and beetles are all waiting for your body heat to guide them to a meal. So, ancient humans invented the insect-repellent mattress. At a site called Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists dug down through layers of ancient bedding dating back an astonishing 77,000 years. What they found wasn't just a pile of old grass. Under a microscope, they discovered that these ancient humans were selectively harvesting the leaves of a specific plant called Cryptocarya woodii, or the Cape laurel tree. Now, why this specific plant? Because the leaves of this tree contain a natural chemical compound that kills and repels insects, especially mosquitoes. But here is what kills me. They didn't just throw the leaves on the ground. They built a multi-layered sandwich of defensive technology. First, they laid down a thick layer of fine ash from old fires. Why ash? Because wood ash is highly alkaline and acts as a powerful desiccant. If a flea or a mite tries to crawl through dry wood ash, the microscopic sharp edges of the ash scrape away the insect's protective waxy outer coating, causing it to dehydrate and die within hours. On top of this chemical kill zone of ash, they laid down the aromatic laurel leaves. And on top of that, they laid down soft, insulating rushes. They were sleeping on a mattress that actively poisoned crawling bugs from below and chemically masked their human scent from flying bugs from above. In recent years, Experimental botanists actually recreated this exact 77,000-year-old bedding recipe. They tested it in modern laboratories against wild mosquitoes and crawling parasites. The results were flawless. The crushed laurel leaves released volatile oils that actively blocked the olfactory receptors of insects, making it almost impossible for them to smell the human sleeping right on top of them. Think about the cognitive leap required here. These people didn't have a periodic table of elements. They didn't have microscopes. But through rigorous observation and trial and error passed down over generations, they isolated the exact plants with insecticidal properties and integrated them into a physical and chemical barrier. This brings us to the second method, which tackles the nightmare of flying insects like midges and mosquitoes. If you have ever been in a swamp or a dense forest at dusk, you know that flying bugs don't care if you have a nice mattress. They follow the carbon dioxide from your breath and the heat radiation from your skin. To stop them, ancient humans mastered the art of the smudge pit. Now, a standard fire provides light and heat, but a high-heat fire doesn't produce much smoke. To fight bugs, you need the exact opposite. You need thick, heavy, low-temperature smoke that hangs in the air like a blanket. Archaeologists have found highly specific, shallow pits dug right at the entrances of ancient rock shelters and huts. These weren't cooking hearths. They were filled with the remains of green pine needles, damp moss, animal manure, and specific aromatic herbs like wild rosemary and wormwood. When you choke a fire with damp, green material, it starves the flame of oxygen and creates a dense cloud of smoke rich in terpenes and tars. This smoke acts as a massive cognitive pattern interrupt for flying insects. It completely floods the surrounding air with heavy particulate matter, blinding the insect's heat sensors and overwhelming their chemical receptors. They literally cannot find you in the fog. But there is a catch here that requires extreme behavioral psychology. Living in a smoke-filled shelter is brutal on human lungs. If you use the wrong wood, you will blind yourself and choke to death before the mosquitoes even get to you. So they didn't just burn anything. They figured out that specific combinations of woods and grasses produced smoke that was highly toxic to bugs but tolerable for human respiratory systems. They designed their shelters with specific ventilation holes at the top, creating a chimney effect where the thickest smoke hovered at the ceiling and mid-levels, right where flying insects enter, while leaving a small pocket of clearer, breathable air right down on the floor where people slept. They engineered a dynamic smoke curtain across their doorways. The third method sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was an absolute necessity for daily life, especially for mobile hunting groups who couldn't carry heavy mattresses with them. It is the concept of chemical body armor. If you cannot change your environment, you change your skin. Ancient humans across the globe discovered that coating their bodies in a thick layer of animal fat mixed with mineral pigments like red ochre or pulverized charcoal created an impenetrable second skin. Picture this. You take rendered tallow or fish oil, which by itself has a strong odor, and you mix it with fine, powdery clay or iron oxide. When you slather this paste over your arms, legs, and face, it does two things simultaneously. First, it creates a literal mechanical barrier. A midge or a blackfly cannot bite through a millimeter-thick layer of dried fat and clay. Their tiny mouthparts get gummed up and blocked. Second, the heavy mineral dust absorbs sweat and skin oils, which are the exact chemical triggers that draw insects from hundreds of yards away. You effectively become a walking stone statue as far as an insect's vision is concerned. We see proof of this working flawlessly in modern ethnographic studies. When researchers look at indigenous groups in the deepest parts of the Amazon or the sub-Saharan regions, they find these traditional pastes are still used today. It isn't just cosmetic or ritualistic decoration. It is highly effective, time-tested chemical warfare. In fact, modern military units operating in extreme jungle environments have studied these ancient mud and ochre mixtures because synthetic bug sprays wash off instantly with heavy sweat, whereas an oil and mineral paste clings to the skin for days, providing continuous protection through the dampest nights. That leads us to the fourth method, which is a tactic used to manage the terrifying problem of long-term infestation. If a group of nomadic hunters stays in a camp for 2 or 3 weeks, their presence attracts local wildlife and creates waste. Within days, the local flea and tick population explodes. The larvae hatch in the dirt floor, waiting for the humans to lie down. If left unchecked, the camp becomes unlivable. The ancient solution: controlled scorched earth sanitation. When archaeologists excavate ancient living floors, they often find thin, highly distinct microlayers of burnt material alternating with clean soil. For a long time, scientists thought these were just accidental tent fires, but closer analysis revealed a deliberate pattern. Before leaving a camp, or immediately upon returning to an old seasonal site, ancient humans would systematically cover the entire floor of their shelters with dry brush and set it ablaze. They would let a fast, incredibly hot fire sweep through the interior structures. This didn't destroy the heavy stone or bone frames, but it reached temperatures high enough to instantly bake the top 2 inches of soil. This literal pasteurization process vaporized flea pupae, exploded tick eggs hidden in the crevices, and neutralized any fungal spores or bacterial colonies breeding in the bedding areas. They were resetting the biological clock of their homes using thermal shock. Think about the discipline required to execute this. Fire was hard to make, and controlling a blaze inside a structure made of hides or wooden posts required master-level flame management. One wrong move and you burn down your entire winter home. But they did it consistently, year after year, because they knew that the short-term effort of burning the floor was infinitely better than the long-term torture of a parasite infestation. The fifth and final method is all about spatial engineering and utilizing the laws of physics. If you cannot kill the bugs, and you cannot block them with smoke, you have to use the environment against them. Mosquitoes and biting flies are incredibly fragile flyers. Most mosquitoes cannot fly effectively against a steady wind speed of greater than 10 miles per hour. Their tiny wings simply cannot generate enough thrust to overcome the air currents. Ancient humans figured this out without ever studying fluid dynamics. When selecting a campsite during the brutal peak of summer insect season, they didn't hide down in the stagnant, humid river valleys where the game was plentiful but the bugs were lethal. Instead, they built their sleeping structures on elevated ridges, exposed bluffs, or right in the mouth of deep wind canyons. They deliberately positioned their sleeping platforms to capture the natural draft zones of the landscape. By lifting their beds off the ground using simple wooden stilts or stacking large flat stones, they did something brilliant. They separated themselves from the cold, damp air mass that settles on the ground at night, which insects love, and placed their bodies directly into the cross breeze. The wind became a natural, automated defensive shield, physically blowing away any flying pests before they could land. It is a technique that requires absolutely zero materials, just a deep, intuitive understanding of weather patterns and insect mechanics. When you look at these 5 methods as a cohesive system, it completely changes how we view our ancestors. They weren't helpless brutes stumbling around in the dark, scratching at bites until they bled. They were practical engineers. They combined botany, geology, architecture, and fire science into a comprehensive survival strategy that allowed them to colonize every corner of this planet, from the mosquito-infested swamps of the tropics to the biting fly-ridden tundras of the north. They paid for this knowledge in blood, sweat, and thousands of years of sleepless nights, refining their techniques so that their children could rest, grow strong, and pass on the survival DNA that eventually led to us. Look around your room one more time. Look at that smooth drywall, the plastic ceiling fan spinning quietly above you, the tiny bottle of lotion on your nightstand, the synthetic sheets that have never touched a speck of wood ash. You didn't have to spend your morning harvesting poisonous laurel leaves. You didn't have to slather your face in rendered animal fat and iron dust just to watch a movie or close your eyes. You didn't have to deliberately set fire to your carpet this morning to kill the flea larvae waiting to climb up your legs. Your shelter requires exactly 0% of your daily mental energy to stay pest-free. We live in a world where safety from nature has become so absolute that we view insects as a minor psychological insult, rather than a life-threatening evolutionary gauntlet. But the brain chemistry inside your skull right now is the exact same brain chemistry that engineered the smoke curtains of the Paleolithic. You are the direct descendant of the master builders who fought the invisible armies of the night and won. They built the foundation of human knowledge, step by agonizing step, and we built the automated systems on top of it. The next time summer comes and you hear that single, high-pitched buzz in the dark, don't just get annoyed. Flip on the light, look at your modern walls, and take a single second to appreciate the absolute magic of a peaceful night's sleep.